Hey, it's Loser. Today I'll be talking about 3 backstories of different songs that are very disturbing. But before we do, if you do like creepy and eerie stories told face to face, this is a perfect place. Make sure you subscribe and leave a like. That will help the channel a lot. Let's get right in. On April 6, 1968, Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys was driving through the road in Malibu, and then he notices 2 hitchhikers on the side of the road, 2 young girls. Their names Kremwinkle and Ella Jo Bailey. He picks them up and leaves them at their destination. Oddly enough, on April 11, Dennis Wilson is driving down the same road and he sees the same girls on the side of the road, again hitchhiking. He slows down, smiles at them, and talks to them briefly, and then takes them back on his car. This time they're more familiar to each other, so they start talking. Dennis mentions their involvement as a band to the Maharishi, guru at the time. Now the 2 girls are surprised, and they too have a guru. They say that there is this guy named Charlie, and he's been just out of prison after serving for 12 years, and that he was their guru. So they keep talking a little bit, and one thing leads to another, and Wilson ends up taking the girls to his home at Sunset Boulevard. Now the next day, Wilson just leaves his house, goes to a recording session. The girls are still at his home, and later that day, when he returns, he sees a man standing in the driveway, not moving at all. And he can't really make out the face because the light from behind is blocking it. He slows down, gets in his driveway, and stops before he gets to the man. Now Wilson, when he leaves the car, he realizes this man is still not moving. He's just standing there and looking at Wilson almost menacingly. Starts walking towards this man, reaches out his hand because he wants to maybe shake it. He's hoping that it's just a fan or someone he knew. And once he gets closer, the man instantly just smiles, a very glowing smile, and he introduces himself as Charlie Manson. They shake hands, and Wilson, in that moment, hears sounds coming from his house. It's almost as though there's a party inside of his house, but when he left, there were only 2 girls behind. So he thinks to himself the girls must have invited other people. He opens the door, and to his shock, he sees at least a dozen people, most of them young women, sitting on his couch, some of them laying on the ground, some of them talking to each other in the kitchen drinking things. He turns to Charlie with a puzzled and surprised look on his face, and Charlie nods, implying that he knows these people. And he then says that this is his family, that they'd be staying here if it was okay for Wilson. Wilson seems excited by the idea of all these women crashing at his place, and he accepts immediately. He doesn't mind at all. Plus, he really hits it off with Charlie. He enjoys talking to this man, and Charlie even mentions that they had met before in a party in San Francisco. Charlie had been there to purchase drugs, and he says that he met Wilson, and that Wilson had invited Charlie to his own home whenever he came to Los Angeles. Now, Wilson doesn't remember any of this, but he doesn't care. The way Charlie walks and talks, his followers calling him the Wizard, and him even appearing on the Rave magazine as this great leader of some sort, it all mesmerizes Wilson in a way that he wasn't expecting. He is almost completely fascinated by this man and his followers, so he enjoys their stay there. Soon enough, these 2 struck a friendship. Manson and his followers stay at Wilson's house. Now these followers were mostly women, and they were treated as servants. This arrangement, though, would not last long, because within 6 months, issues starting to occur, and Wilson started realizing what a grave mistake he'd done. During that time, Wilson introduced Charlie to some of his friends in the music business, including the Byrds' producer, Terry Melcher. Charlie recorded numerous songs at Wilson's home studio. Now, these recording sessions were merely done for Dennis Wilson and then this Terry Melcher, the producer. Now, none of these songs have ever been released to the public, and they're still to this day unknown mostly. But there's one song that would make the front page. In September 1968, Wilson recorded a song from Charlie that was made for the Beach Boys called Cease to Exist, but it was later reworked by Dennis Wilson and called Never Learn Not to Love before it was released same year in December to the public by the Beach Boys and written by Dennis Wilson. The writing, however, only credited Wilson, even though Charlie Manson was on it and he was the main writer of the song. Now, Dennis Wilson was asked why Charlie was not included in the credits of the song, and Dennis Wilson just answered that Charlie had relinquished his rights for the song by acquiring hundreds of thousands of dollars of material or things from Dennis, and that included a motorcycle as well. It was around this time that things were getting out of control at the Wilson residence. The family started to act more erratic, and they even destroyed 2 of luxurious cars that Dennis Wilson owned. They just smashed it completely and destroyed it with these bats and whatnot. Manson had warned Dennis Wilson of changing the lyrics of the song. He even threatened Wilson that if he were to change the lyrics or any part of the music at all, that he would kill him. Now, Greg Jacobson, a songwriter and also a friend of Dennis Wilson, has also shared that Manson talked to him privately as well, telling him to never let anybody change any of the lyrics at all. Wilson, though, did not like the initial part of the song, and before introducing it to his band, the Beach Boys, he made some tweaks and some changes. Now, this infuriated Charlie immensely. He got so angry and riled up. Whenever Wilson would come back to his home, Charlie would have these long, cold stares at him. This anger, it was coming out of his eyes, and Wilson would be just scared and creeped out by Charlie and the way he would look at him. Charlie soon would even have these erratic behaviors. He would just start laughing all of a sudden. He would have these screams and these creepy laughters within the house, all the while he was hanging out with his followers, and Wilson would be listening to these even behind his locked door in his room, and he would be creeped out by it. He would be afraid of it. It came to the point where he didn't feel comfortable in his own house anymore. Charlie's drug situation had also worsened. He would take these huge amounts of acid and lose control and lose his mind almost. Wilson could not tolerate this. When Charlie started to act up like this, he asked Charlie to leave his house, which Charlie replied to with a laugh. Then one day, almost out of the blue, Charlie comes up to Wilson with this very serious face, and in his voice there is no shivering, no joking whatsoever, and he tells Wilson that he will kill him for what he did to his song. Immediately that day, Wilson ends his relationship with Charlie, leaving the house and leaving the Sunset Boulevard home behind him, as well as the family. Almost all of Wilson's household possessions were practically stolen by the family. 3 weeks before the lease for the house was gonna expire, the members were completely evicted. However, Charlie did not take kindly of this. He didn't want to end his relationship with Wilson. He knew what he had done to him and his song, and he couldn't just get away with it like that. He continued to chase Wilson, tried to follow him in places, or tried to track him. He sought further contact. However, Wilson avoided him at all costs. Now, one day, Wilson comes back from the studio to his new home, where his housekeeper is waiting for him, who should have already left, and he's just super cold. His face is insanely tense. You can see the blood has gone away from his face. He just seems blank, white as a paper, and Wilson is afraid something has happened when the housekeeper gives Wilson a bullet, and attached to the bullet is a message sent by Charlie Manson and his followers. Now, Wilson did not need to read the message to know what this bullet meant, but he read it anyway, and the message said, "Cease to exist." After that, Wilson had become even more concerned. He even got paranoid, and it came to the point where he'd be afraid to leave the house and stopped going out altogether. He would only go to the studio and then just come back to his home, and that's it. He wouldn't go to parties or to where people would hang out, nothing. He was afraid of Charlie and his followers, that they would take him down. Even at his own house, And his own studio, he would not feel safe. He couldn't sleep at night. He had these nightmares. And in one of his dreams, which he believed to be a dream, it was Charlie shooting down a man in half with an M16 rifle and then hiding the body inside a well. He later realized that that dreamy sequence he thought wasn't real had actually happened, and that he had maybe too much drugs and he didn't really remember quite the details. He was now aware that the family was indeed killing people. At that point, he was so freaked out, he didn't want to live anymore. That's how scared he was, constantly having to look behind his shoulder, the things he had witnessed, and the fear that the family would come for him eventually. It was too much. It became uninhabitable for him. He wanted to go to the authorities and tell the police everything that had happened and tell the police about Charlie. But he was so afraid that he ends up never doing it. And a few months later, the famous murders took place. Now, when Charlie was caught in November for those murders and for numerous other murder counts and charged by them, Wilson did not want to take the stand and testify against Charlie because he was too afraid the family would come for him. He even told the press later, "I couldn't, I was so scared." He was, however, interviewed by a private prosecutor named Vincent Bugliosi. In the subsequent years, Wilson continued to receive death threats from the Manson family. They would call his home telephone and tell him, "You're next," and just hang up immediately. He would find these notes at the front of his door, "We're coming," or "Cease to exist." In 1976, when he was asked about his connections to Charlie Manson and the family, he commented, "I don't talk about Manson, I think he's a sick person." In the 1978 biography, In the Beach Boys and California Myth, Wilson expressed that he knew why Manson did what he did. He knew why the family was doing what they were doing, and he would talk about it to the world. He said that he would tell the world someday and write a book about it. Unfortunately, it never came to that. Wilson would die a few years later due to cancer and some issues in his lungs, and he would never come around writing this book that he mentioned. Now, upon his death, Manson was quoted saying, "He died by my shadow because he changed the lyrics to my song and to my soul." So the song "Never Learn Not to Love" was "Cease to Exist" by Charlie Manson. Our second song is even more disturbing, and I advise viewer discretion. Now, Jonathan Davis was only 16 years old when he sought the Regional Occupation Program. This was a program where they would send young people to hospitals or other healthcare sectors where they could find work and help with certain things to the doctors, to the nurses, just a healthcare work opportunity program, basically. At first, he started working as an assistant, just helping out in the hospital, the nurses, and then a coroner's office job came up. Now, Jonathan had the intrigue to much darker things, and he loved everything about horror movies and horrifying things. This definitely intrigued him in a sense where he wanted to give it a shot. He actually lays on his bed looking at the ceiling and imagining what it would be like to work in a morgue where you're analyzing a dead body and trying to determine what had caused the death. He imagines himself just cutting it up. He applied for it, and there were 3 interviews, one of them being a psychiatric test and a psychology background test, basically. Now, these psychology tests were quite difficult. They were like these personality tests where with each answer, you just are not sure what's the correct way to go. You could be right or wrong. It surely was a test to see if he was fit for this job, even subconsciously. He does, however, end up getting selected for the job, and at the age of 17, he starts working at the coroner's office doing autopsies. At first, it's really exciting. Cutting up these dead people to see what had caused their death. He's really intrigued by it, the anatomy of human and just this flesh, and he's learning a lot too, until the much younger bodies start to come out. When it was older people, he was fine with it, but when he starts seeing, younger people, even younger than him at the age of 17, he doesn't really enjoy it anymore. The thrill, the excitement is gone. It's replaced by this gut-wrenching feeling. And each time that he's called to perform an autopsy, he's afraid that's gonna be another very young person. There are these deaths of children that found their parents' drug stash and accidentally overdosed themselves. And for a 17-year-old, those things were much too dark for him to see. The worst, though, was yet to come. When he was 18 and he'd been performing these autopsies for a year now, there comes a case that would make him regret ever getting into this business at all. Over that period of 1 year, he had become a much tougher person, but what was about to come was gonna break him anyway. It was an 11-month-old baby, beaten to death by her father. Jonathan had no words to say. He was sick to the stomach. His mouth was completely dry. He was shivering in anger. His hands, he couldn't control them, just shaking constantly. He left the morgue, never to return. He couldn't do it anymore. There are a few more gruesome details to this case that I chose not to mention. Either way, after that day, Jonathan goes to San Francisco College of Mortuary Science to study and to become an investigator. He had gotten into this path, but he didn't want to continue as an autopsy performer. He wanted to make a change where he didn't have to see the dead bodies or have to dig into them to find out what had caused them to die. He first became an embalmer, and then he became an investigator that would just investigate the deaths or why it happened, but no autopsies anymore. That's when he got the call from Korn to try out, and surely enough, he was successful and became the lead singer of Korn. Jonathan had post-traumatic stress and ended up getting a lot of therapy just to be able to sleep at night because of all the deaths he'd seen when he was much younger, 17, 18 years old. And the song Pretty was written and sung for that 11-month-old baby. Oddly enough though, Jonathan's intrigue into the eerie and creepy or dark things never really stopped. He was at one point a major collector of serial killer memorabilia, and at one point even had Ted Bundy's Volkswagen Bug. Now, he sold all of that when he had his own kids because he didn't want them seeing them. One more strange detail, Jonathan Davis was asked what the most interesting death he had seen was while he was performing these autopsies. And there's one that stood out to him the most, which he answered immediately. It was death by typewriter. It was one of those old school steel deck type, very heavy typewriters. You can pop that thing up, and someone went underneath it to reach something, but as they were reaching it, the typewriter had fallen off, and it was an instant death almost, concussion and internal bleeding into death. Now this is our last story of the day. Delia Green was only 13 years old, and at the time she was seeing this young boy, Mose Houston, that was 15 years old. It happened a few months, but Delia felt that it was time to end the relationship. She just didn't feel the same way as she used to towards Mose. He was becoming more fierce, more demanding, and constantly angry about things. And it was before Christmas Eve in the 1900s. Delia decides to talk to her boyfriend at a diner and tell him that they should break up. When she opens up this topic, however, Mose doesn't seem interested. He doesn't want to listen to her. He just shuts her up and says, "No way, we're never gonna break up. You and I were destined to be together. We're gonna marry in a few years. Don't worry, I have plans. I'm gonna find a job. We're gonna get married." Now, Delia, at first, she can't really say anything because Mose doesn't shut up. And then when she finally has the chance to speak up again, she says, "No way, Mose. I just can't anymore. I don't want it anymore. I don't ever want to see you again." And she gets up, but just as she does so, Mose reaches and grabs her by the wrists and really squeezes her wrists, holds them really tight, and pulls Delia to himself. And people in the diner, they're shocked. Not many tables taken at that point. They're looking at what's going on, and some of them try to intervene even. Mose tells her, "You are mine and nobody else's. "You cannot leave. I will not let you." Delia gets really scared at that point because she sees those blank stares in Moses' eyes. People in the diner intervene and somehow get Mose away from Delia. Delia starts crying and she says it's all over and she never wants to see him again. She starts running out of the diner and Mose attempts to run from behind her, but the people stop him there. So Delia that day goes home. She still cries over the things that have happened and the sort of threats that Mose has made, of course, had made her feel uncomfortable and scared. But she sleeps the night, and in a few days' time, she doesn't hear or see Mose ever again and thinks it's over. On the night of Christmas Eve, Delia goes to a friend's house in Savannah, Georgia. Now, this friend, Willie, was a family friend, and he was a very kind person. He listens to Delia and her story as to what had happened to her and her breakup, and he's saddened by it, but he tells her that it will be okay. They have their dinner, it's a very warm Christmas night, and then Willie starts washing the dishes when the doorbell rings. Delia yells, "I'll get it," and gets up from her couch to see who it is. Willie, still washing the dishes, hears a shot. Instantly, he drops the dishes into the water, just breaking, and he turns around, kind of ducks even because he's afraid he was shot at, and then hears another shot. He immediately runs to the door to see Delia on the ground, bleeding, and she's no longer breathing. He sees someone run away. He chases that person in the dark, runs as fast as he can, and takes him down. Now the neighbors have heard the shots. Police arrives, and with the help of Willie, who had caught the shooter, they arrest Mose Houston for shooting Delia once from the side and then once from the heart. Mose at first admits to the police that he did indeed shoot Delia, but later in court he denies this and says that it was all an accident. He was only there to talk some sense into Delia, to convince her of their relationship and to tell her that he loved her. He claims that he had no idea the gun would fire off. He was only gonna threaten her to love her, and as he pointed it, it had just gone off. Now, Mose, he's sentenced to life prison. He only serves, though, 12 years of that life sentence. After that, he gets paroled by a governor. And for the rest of his life, it's said that he lives in New York and then dies there 15 years later. In the song Delia's Gone by Johnny Cash, Johnny is singing from the point of view of Mose Houston. He sings as though he meets with her and tells her that there's no other way, that she had to be his. In the lyrics, he says, "If your woman is devilish, you can let her run," which would imply setting her free. Or, he sings, "You can take her down, like Delia was done." It is a very sad and creepy and also scary point of view that's being sung here. This was the last song of the day that I believe had a quite disturbing backstory of a 13-year-old being shot when she was just in her youth, and the days and years were still ahead of her. We've come to the end of our video today. I hope you did enjoy these 3 disturbing backstories of the songs mentioned in the video. If you'd like to see more, please let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions of songs or similar stories that you know of, let me know and I can tell them in a future video. Also, if you do like the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe so that our channel can grow and I can bring out more videos in the future. There is a really creepy song coming up. It's a ukulele song. Make sure you enjoy it before you leave. Stay safe and stay eerie.
Tried to walk home last night, really thought I'd be fine, but then a sudden thump behind. Wait, is that an alien? What was that sound I heard? Jane, please stop fooling around. What do you mean wash the dishes? Do you realize what time it is? I'm getting the creeps again. Look at these goosebumps on my skin. If I'm not back by 8, the delivery guy probably did it. Now I must fade in the dark, get away from everyone. Oh Jane, I'm so afraid. I'm begging you to stay. Is someone watching me as I'm wide to sleep. Getting those goosebumps again. Wait, am I peeing? I'm so scared that I'm peeing.